I lived in Hong Kong for a year long ago, and then I lived in China for a few years after that. I speak Chinese well.
Let me ask you this. Maybe just to start, I'll introduce you in a second, but I just wanted to. What's your, and this is a big question, I'm sure, but what's your opinion of China? Especially, I just saw you on Twitter. They were talking about the Chinese spy balloon that was
Yeah,
detected over America. And I just wanted, if you have any brief thoughts on what you think about China, because in our scene especially, there's some people who love China and think it's going to conquer the great Satan, and then there's other people that just don't like China. They don't trust them. What's your opinion of China?
right. So for me, it's kind of personal, right? I lived there many years. I speak the language well. I have many friends, many relationships there. So it's not that abstract, but and of course, there's been a big change, right? I was very pro-China for, especially when I was there, because I was there for a reason. I actually liked living there. I thought it was a very cool place to be. And a lot of the things that I hate about living in the West are things that don't happen in China. So I really thought that it was a good thing that China was growing more powerful and having more influence in the world because a lot of the nonsense that we people in our scene hate just don't exist in China. A lot of them do, but a lot of them don't. Right. So I was very pro China, but then COVID happened. I think China went completely batshit insane on COVID, and I left. I left just at the beginning of COVID. Thought they would snap out of it, and they didn't. Well, they just did this year. But for 3 long years, China just blew away all the good stuff that they had, all the advantages that they had, and
That's what my friend was dealing with too, because he one of the reasons he left in such a hurry last year was because China was kind of bad with COVID for much of the time, but he said even still they were black bagging people in the streets and sending them and their families to go live in shipping containers.
yeah, because of the COVID thing. And
Yeah,
again, and I like China because personally, I just happen to like living in China. I love the food. I get along well with the people. I think it's a beautiful country in many ways. But again, personally, COVID really, they kicked me out. They literally, well, they didn't kick me out, but they didn't let me back in. Not that I wanted to.
really. So was that just because of your status as a foreigner, or is it something else? If you don't mind me
No,
asking.
I had a work visa, but it expired, and chose not to renew it. And given what my friends that did remain in China told me about, how life was now, I chose not to go back. And I've been very happy since. And I don't regret it at all.
Well, let me ask you this: from what you know of having your friends in China, is there any movement on the ground there of other people wanting to leave? Is it just foreigners, or do you see Chinese people changing the tone of their relationship with the government at all?
Well, so change that thing have changed a lot this year when last month China again made an amazing flip on the topic and just opened up immediately. Like it went from one extreme to the other. So a lot of people have been leaving during these 3 years, and especially foreigners. I mean, probably 80% of the white population in China is just left. But
Are
now,
they
it's
heading to
open
other
again.
Asian? Are they heading to other Asian countries when they leave China, or do you think they're going back to the West?
Well, I mean, a lot of people will move to Thailand first because it's a typical holiday destination for people in China. I know if you were working remote or something, you could live in Thailand pretty well. So a few people did that. But most people, they had a normal office job in China, and when they quit that, they have nowhere else to go. So most people that I know went home.
On that topic, before we get too deep into that, I am going to introduce you now. I am here speaking with the legendary Spandrell. A lot of people in our scene will know that name, and we not long ago spoke with a good friend of the show by the name of Clossington, where we discussed some of the ideas pioneered in your famous website, and anyone can go look at this right now. It's called Bloody Shovel. It's at spandrell.com, spandrell.com. You could find all of his writing there from over the years, which is updated fairly recently as well. He's also back on Twitter at Spandrell3. And failing that, you can also find Spandrell here on Urbit. And first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks for having me.
And before we get started, I've always wanted to ask you specifically this, uh, and because I know there's a lot of confusion, especially in our scene. Could you explain Urbit for a second? What do you like about Urbit? Why do you spend most of your time there? And would you recommend other people get into it, or are you kind of do you like it being this sort of niche thing?
Right. So Orbit is a personal server OS. It's an operating system which works as a personal server. You would need to know a bit of how the internet works, but to make it easy, when you send a message to anyone on WhatsApp or Telegram, what happens is your message goes to to Facebook's servers, right, or Apple's or whoever's. Then they relay those messages to who you're talking to, right? And that's insane, right? If I want to talk to my mother, I want to talk to my wife, I shouldn't have to send my messages to Facebook, right? It's really a matter of principle. What Orbit does is facilitate peer-to-peer communication because every single Orbit user has its own server. You can send messages directly to people. You can build a bunch of applications there. Most people use chat, but there's a bunch of other things. It's still early days. The user experience is not as good as it could be. But again, I think it's a matter of principle. Why should I send my messages to other people when I just want to talk to my friends?
That's a great point. I've been trying to get on Urbit myself recently, and I haven't developed the mind for it yet. But I've been trying to encourage people to, even with Telegram. I like Telegram quite a bit, but I don't really trust Telegram. It seems like
Exactly,
I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop when it comes to Telegram. It's very mysterious why it exists because it doesn't seem
exactly.
to be very revenue positive either.
Right. Where does he make the money, and why is he offering this free, cool messaging app? Right. What's in it for him? I don't get it.
Yeah, maybe he might be the altruistic philosopher king we've all been waiting for, but I'm more cynical than that. Now, as with, we'll get into the topics now. Now, when we had Colossal Dawn, we discussed some of the ideas, but I'm hoping to go straight to the source with you and discuss some of them in a bit more detail. But I think it's probably important we define our terms. So, some people will recognize a lot of the things we're going to talk about from various chats they've permeated into the scene. The three that I found the most fascinating were IQ Shredder, Bioleninism, and I think at the base of that is the social calculus model. Now, I'm sure you're probably sick and tired of talking about all this forever, but I was wondering if we could spend a bit of time discussing, maybe before we get into, maybe start with Bioleninism, because I think that grounds some of it. Did you? I could describe it for a bit, but I wonder if you had a brief way of outlining it for people who've never heard of it before.
Right. So the short story would be that there's two types of political systems, right? There's those with closed access and those which are open access. If you're some medieval monarchy in the year 1000, the king is the king and he has his buddies, and you don't get to engage in politics if you're not family or good friends with the king. It just doesn't happen. It's a closed access system, so everything that happens goes around the king. And in an open access system, though, that we have, anybody can get into politics if we follow the rules. And the way the rules work in our systems, which are liberal democracies, is that you make a political party, right? You join a political party, and they help you get elected, and then once you're elected, you do what the party usually what the party tells you to do. So, what kind of person goes into a political party, and what kind of employee? So, members of political parties are employees in a way, right? So, what kind of people join political parties, and what do political parties want of their staff? And if you think about it, it's not a good job, right? Anybody can. It's not a good way to make money. If you want a job, joining a political party is just not. It's not very lucrative. I mean, it can be if you're corrupt. But
It seems to be popular with particularly ambitious bureaucrats.
is it though? Because bureaucrats make good money. There's very high-ranking, smart people in the Department of Finance or whatever, and I know some of those. And they can be very smart and competent people, and they have a good life, and they don't have to get all the flack that a politician gets. Right? It's a much easier job to be a bureaucrat. It's 9 to 5. and pretty easy, I'm told. A politician that have to do elections and campaigns, and then all the back room gossip and backside and all that stuff. It's it's a tricky job. It's not a job for just a smart person who wants to just raise a family.
Yeah, and I also think that ties into another idea that I just mentioned, which I think I pronounced it wrong. Is the social calculus module, and my summary of that, at least what I got from it, was it's something that a lot of people will implicitly understand, where people have a calculation going in their minds all the time of their social status, where they are within the larger hierarchy. And this calculation is different, of course, for every country. And that having lived in China, I'm sure that you hear stories about how people calculate their status based on different inputs than what we would in the West. But we are always keenly aware of that. And I think it's important to remember for people, even these bureaucrats, even like the people who get into political parties. I think what you're also implying is that exact same model is running, and they're very, very interested in their own status. Would that be correct?
Exactly. Yes. We all are, right? I mean, the way I see this, it's the primary function of all social behavior. Not in all social animals, really. Humans more so because we're more social. But all social animals, the the key to your survival and reproduction is the status inside the group. So that's the one thing you should care about.
Yeah, and in your there's a series you had done on your blog titled Bloody Shovel on the Spandrell.com. You can find Bloody Shovel 3, the third iteration. You have this little segment here that I think puts it into context for people, because a lot of what you also talk about is the Soviet Union as a great example of this in action. And there's just a little part here I'm going to read for people. And it's what did Lenin do? Exterminate the natural aristocracy of Russia and build a ruling class with a bunch of low status people, workers, peasants, Jews, Latvians, Ukrainians. Lenin went out of his way to recruit everyone who held a grudge against imperial Russian society. The early Soviet Union promoted minorities, women, sexual deviants, atheists, cultists and every kind of weirdo. Everybody but intelligent, conservative Russians of good families. And so you had a line here that I thought was so good, which was that Leninism, as such, was a way to hack this social calculus model. It was a way to take all the people who had no status and rally them around the advocacy of getting them status. And it wasn't really any highfalutin philosophical thing. It was just you found the human capital that was ravenous enough to try and claw status to themselves on a strictly almost personal level. Would that be correct?
Yes, yes, and if I mean, I'm not Russian myself, and I wasn't there. But if you read any history on the Russian Revolution, it really strikes you, what weird and disagreeable and just nasty people were at the forefront of all that.
Yeah. And an interesting thing, and so Bioleninism, and again, people check out the series of 3 articles titled Bioleninism on Spandrell.com. But when I read it all those years ago, I saw it sort of developing alongside, I'm sure you're aware of him, Edward Dutton. He's done a lot of work recently on his central thesis of spiteful mutants. And
Right,
he's taken it from strictly a evolutionary biological standpoint, which is saying that there's these people that are just biologically inferior. They're gross. They're freaks. They're genetic dead ends, and and I see bioleninism as the systems model of what these people do, and you can join both of these theories. They go hand in hand. So bioleninism is sort of the technique and strategy they use, but on a biological level, you just have this mass of people that are just low IQ, maybe mentally ill, maybe and the more they succeed in the system, the more the system fails. And that I think you had stated in your blog that liberalism as a system has no way to sort out those people. Would that be correct?
yeah, exactly. And in an older day, people who are just of in a healthy disposition, they would just die off because people were poor and there was not enough food to go around. But now we are all very rich and there's food for everyone. So we have a lot of very unfit people around, which again wouldn't have never existed or very seldom existed during history. But now we have millions of them. And they're here, they're humans too, and they want a good life. They want status like everyone else. So what would they do? Like, what would you do, right? This is not about them being bad people, although many of them are, but it's just a natural result of there's only so much status to go around, and there's always going to be conflict.
Well, that's interesting. Would status be a finite resource? Because I never really thought of it like that. But there, like you had said, there's only so much status to go around. Is there any system that can grant equal status to everyone? Do you think that's even possible?
No, it doesn't work like that because we all want more stuff. And even if we all agree to all have the same amount of stuff, right? We do want better mates, right? And biologically, good genes are, I guess, normally distributed, right, in adult curves. We'll want the prettiest girl, right? So who gets the prettiest girl? Usually the guy with more status, and the other way around, right? Girls probably more so, right? Girls are more into status, are more into getting the top guy. So who gets it? There's only one top guy. There's only one prettiest girl in the class. There's always going to be fights for that.
Do you think, and I know this is a bit of a tangent right now, but I know one thing that you are very interested in these days is genetic engineering. And I guess we can call it sort of scientific eugenics and stuff. Do you think that there will be a future where they actually, and by they I mean that's a pretty broad they, but some groups or whatever try and standardize eugenics and gene editing in the interest of making everyone beautiful, or making, at least bringing everyone down to the same average of beauty?
Right. That is one of the things that gets me uh, gets me awake at night. I have a friend. I have a friend who is actually doing embryo selection for himself. He's tried to conceive, and he found a company who's willing to, get embryos and choose the highest IQ one and implant it. And talking about that, we all agree that it's at some point the cat is out of the bag. The technology already exists, even though we can't engineer them yet, but we're going to select them. What happens right now? Everybody's scared because it's kind of in a gray zone, probably legal. So people are doing it in Panama and places like that, right? What happens when Western governments stop banning it and they try to play with it? And the first thing they do is mandate that all black babies have to be or 140 IQ, and white babies have to be the other way around. It's kind of like
Yeah,
Brave
yeah.
New World, but in a racialized way.
That, like, and for people who don't see that as a possibility, haven't really been paying attention. And someone had made a comment, I forget who actually did it, might have been Closterton actually, but they were pointing out how Hispanics and South Americans and Mexicans are more openly, we could use the word racist, but they're more in love with having a white baby. So there was just this amusing eventuality that as America gets browner and bans genetic engineering, you see South America purposefully keeping white people alive. And then over the course of 50 years, South America just becomes like white. That would be
Well,
very
yeah, I mean,
amusing to me.
if South Americans could do actual, designer babies, all the kids in South America would look Swedish, like every single one.
Yeah. And that'd be great. That's our great migration through the genetic engineering.
Yeah, and in India, I mean, probably in India they wouldn't look like Swedes, but they would look like Italians.
Yeah, yeah. And then once again, the Italians are just edged out of the conversation. I was going to say one more thing that we had talked about again with Colossium, but I found this idea fascinating, and whenever I explain it to people, it really clicks with them, and that it goes in along with everything we were just saying, which is the concept of the IQ shredder. Now, my understanding of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's sort of the eventuality of inevitability of brain drain, which is you drain all of the high IQ people from, let's say, India, let's say Africa, wherever, bring them into the West. But what happens, the IQ shredding, is that these people, once they're in this system, they tend not to propagate very much. They tend not to have a lot of kids. They tend to spend all their time on frivolousness, and then they kind of die out and do not over time raise the standard IQ. So these types of city states and whatever. I think you had Singapore as a great example. They actually they destroy the high performing IQ. Now, does that is that accurate? My assessment there.
Yeah, exactly. So I came up with the concept after having drinks with Nick Land in Shanghai in 2012. And yeah, he was saying how much he likes Singapore, how cool it is, and he was doing this, more abstract idea that city states like Singapore will concentrate intelligence, and out of that, good things will come. But again, I do know Singapore quite well, and if you know Singapore, it's a nice place to be, but it's kind of an interesting, boring place to go. Which doesn't have a lot of prestige in Asia at all. It's a nice place where people go shopping, and it's a good place to run a company. But it's not this beacon of civilization where amazing inventions are being made, right? And again, if intelligent, and it's true that they have, I mean, the birth rate in Singapore is very low, right? It's about one. So the population would naturally halve every generation. And they compensate that by bringing migrants from mostly China, because Singapore has a demographic balance that they try to keep. So they try to bring the same number of people from China, India, and Malaysia that they already have to keep things the same way, which is it's a an interesting policy. But anyway, they bring smart people from China, and then what happens to them? They have one baby, so they have every generation. So they're bringing valuable genes that raise IQ, and they're shredding them consistently all the time. And yeah, they produce GDP for them, but are they conquering the world? Are they becoming big and amazing? No, it's just a boring small city, which makes I don't know what does Singapore make again?
Yeah, look, it's all throughout time. Like Singapore, to me, when I read about it, it's always just been this port city, and Singapore is often held up as a model city, and people in the West who like this stuff, like, look at this economically thriving place that is multicultural. It's open to international commerce, and so that's being sold to a lot of people at these various conferences here. But I think it's important to know what you just did, like when you're on the ground there, but they're not a producer of anything. There's just like it's like a theme park in a sense. People spend time there and they get their thrills, but you just need to keep on that treadmill.
I mean, they have a good economy, and they have a good manufacturing sector, and I'm sure they make stuff even if not famous consumer products. But I mean, it's not like they're building castles in the sky and people work 3 hours a day, right? It's a very pleasant place, but it's a very normal place where people go to the office and have a job. And if they were actually reproducing normally, that would be fine, right? Just a good place with smart policies. But I don't think Singapore is worth the burning of valuable IQ genes like they're doing. Right? If you're burning intelligence like that, which again is it's in short supply, in order to build whatever rockets to go to Mars and terraform them, then okay, maybe that's worth it. But I don't think Singapore is cool enough to be worth the hundreds of thousands of high IQ genes that they're burning every year.
Yeah, it seems to me, from a political standpoint, that bringing in high IQ people has always been, and I'm using a Canadian perspective on this too, has always been just wedged to get in low IQ people. Because you have to think in Canada, like we want high IQ, we want university graduates, we want all these smart people, and then you say for what? Because we don't really do anything with them in Canada. We don't really have that we're not pioneers, but we just love vacuuming them up and putting them in these positions that don't really maximize the utility of the IQ. And then that's always used as, see, look at all these smart immigrants. Now that means we can bring in all the other immigrants. So it's almost that they're practically, from a political strategy standpoint, used to just get other people in and just never use the high IQ people anyway.
Well, I wouldn't say that's the case in Singapore. Although they do have a lot of low IQ immigrants too. The construction workers and the manual jobs are done by immigrants too. And there's more of those than there are high IQ people. But they do bring high IQ executives to work at the banks and make new businesses. That is a thing, and that brings them value. But again, the value they bring is not worth getting smart engineers and get them in a city where they only have one kid instead of five.
Yeah, you had this little another segment of your blog that I found very interesting, um, and it was sort of you were talking about how in the West, especially with liberals, they prefer to have foreigners as the servants and in these lower class and manual labor jobs. And it reminded me of a conversation I was having with my friend Christopher Sandbatch recently. And I disagreed with him at first, but maybe I'm coming around to it. But he had said that the line was everyone kind of wants to have slaves. And I'm like, I don't know about that, but maybe because you were kind of saying that people are more comfortable if their servants are of a different ethnicity to them. And I think the line you had was prole co-ethnics are the personification of downward mobility, and everyone hates downward mobility. So the physical replacement of proles who look like you is actually a very good proposition for most people. You call this the housewife theory of the great replacement. Somebody put it in French, please.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
exactly. And
I thought that was a very, very poignant comment. Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
this week, some guy said that on Twitter. And just I was just browsing Twitter, and it came on my timeline. The guy was just saying that and related. I was like, yes. I said I wrote about this years ago, and yeah, I mean, I'm from Europe, right? So we don't have like the millions of. We don't have the scale of immigration is bad, but it's not Canada bad, and probably not as bad as in the U.S. But you do see that a lot. And yeah, I mean, I've seen European housewives be very happy with their Arab or South American or wherever.
And you know what's funny is that I noticed when I started seeing people use the term the global south, I always thought that was a very strange way to like introduce that concept to the conversation. People talk about we need to support the global south. But it started to make sense when I realized, oh, the people who are saying this are kind of grouping more than half the planet into a single class subconsciously. And the reason they're doing that is because maybe they're running some internal calculus where they've identified, oh, everyone from South America is like a servant person, and everyone from Africa is a servant person. So we kind of see this. That's what I'm saying. You're correct. I think they believe that even subconsciously, and they can't escape it to the point where anything south of fucking like south of Florida, is just one caste.
Yeah, I think the global south is an academic thing, though. It's a buzzword on academic, development circles. So that's probably where it comes from. Because and these people talk about countries, right? They don't have any concept of class or population. So if Colombia is poor, Colombia is poor, and all Colombians are poor, even though the upper class in Colombia.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now I'll move on to the next one because I know you're very short on time. So it might seem like I'm trying to speed us along, but there's a bunch of stuff that I had a lot of listeners who were very excited about you coming on too, and a couple of them had submitted questions they wanted to ask you. And I'm just going to preface this by saying one of the things you mentioned in your blog is that you started your blog with the goal of unpacking leftism and how it has taken over the West and keeps winning. And I think that's really a central theme in your blog about how a lot of people might not consider the left as always winning, but you had also made a good point that even nationalism you saw as a successful left-wing movement against what they may call the ancien regime. Would that be correct? And am I being
Yeah,
fair there?
yeah, and that's not my point. It's a real point, but yeah.
Yeah. And I was curious that how this has evolved for you about your views of the left and how they keep winning since around 2017, especially in the wake of COVID and other geopolitical developments. Because I know when we were speaking in the email, you were pretty cynical about the future of things, whereas you might have been more optimistic in the past. And I was just wondering, since your huge output in the blog, how much has your outlook developed or changed?
And in terms of of the future of being optimistic.
In terms of the left, and their, do you still think the left is still winning with their policies and outlook? Have you seen any successful right wing pushback, anything like that, or is the left
I
still
don't know.
winning and winning?
Oh man, they're winning by they're crushing us. I mean, it's really bad. Like, just look at it. I mean, you're in Canada, right? In Canada, you had this trucker thing going on last year. Was it?
Yeah,
What happened to that?
exactly. It was what had happened to that. I think was it was successfully rerouted because even when the trucker protest was going on the show, we can get in trouble for saying stuff like this. But I was saying that what they should be doing is building guillotines outside Parliament Hill. But
No
they
kidding.
that was the if you follow to its natural conclusion. But they were the funny thing about Canada. This is another thing we bring up a lot. The only reason that the trucker protest was permitted to get as far as it did was more about Canada's inability to marshal its forces. Because you have to understand one thing about Canada, it's that it doesn't have a lot of money, it's very spread out, and the infrastructure is not very good. So my thing was Justin Trudeau, the leader, would absolutely love to have rolled in a bunch of tanks, but we don't have tanks. We had like three
Right.
submarines and two of them fell apart due to lack of maintenance. We're not good at it. So it was a shock to the system in more ways than one. But I know Curtis Yarvin had made a comment about how they're not going to make that same mistake in the future. I mean, we'll see, but most of the truckers were just standard conservatives who were just, if you look at what they were actually asking for, they were saying we just don't want the border closed to truckers. But my policy was, what you the thing that I said was when you're throwing a punch, you don't throw a punch just to connect with someone's face. You throw a punch to throw your fist through the back of their head. But that's how you throw a strong punch. You need the correct trajectory. But
Yeah.
if your punch falls short, then the impact changes. Anyway, that's a bit of a rambling thing. But ultimately, I think what happens is conservatives and the right, they're too they're too eager to fall for promises, and their inability to just kick their enemies when they're down, I think, really hurts them. Because conservatives and the right broadly, even the dissident right, I don't think know how to win. And to win, you need to be a bully. You need to be mean. And I think that's what the left has on the right, which is that the moment they win, they forget that they've won and act like on to the next thing. There's no celebration to the leftist, if
Exactly.
they have asked for $5 and they shake you down for $5, they'll get angrier that you didn't give them 20. And when I talk to
Yeah.
conservatives, I'm like, your highfalutin and nobility is going to get you annihilated.
Right. My argument is a bit circular, but my definition of the right is the people who have better things to do than politics. Right. And the left is the people who don't have better things to do than politics. So if you're right wing is usually people who just want to grill, you just want to do your job, make good money, and you know, as far as possible, have the government leave you alone. And if that's your goal, if you just want to grill, and then you have a bunch of antifas who really, really want to kill you, you're not going to win, right? They also say that in China. I mean, people without scruples always outcompete people with scruples.
This is true. And I wonder, is Bioleninism an IQ shredder in itself? And by that, I mean, in let's say Canada and the US, for example, that we're in a situation where I'm sure you agree that we're promoting the detritus of society. The spiteful mutants are rising through the ranks. And it seems that the high IQ people in society are forced to adopt at least the behavior of the mentally ill people. So is it possible that as these degenerates rise up through the ranks, it actually suppresses the high IQ in a society by making the high IQ people not only a bit more mentally ill, but also ostracized. Also, they don't want to have kids, and maybe they're even more suicidal. Do you see that
It
phenomenon
does.
happen?
It does, especially with women, because women are more suggestible, more collectivistic in general. And all this whole like trans thing going on of late, it's mostly women being, psyoped into thinking they're not women, right? Especially, plain women who probably think they will never get a good mate anyway. Because hot girls never go trans. It's always the normal ones. and you get this really normal, just normal girls who would be perfectly normal in any other age, and now they're being suggested into getting sex reassigning surgery, which is really tragic.
Yeah, I think the trans issue is probably the best example. Thank you for bringing that up, where we have the numbers to show that transgenderism, especially in young people, has gone up considerably over the past decade. So you have a mental illness spreading that leads to quite literally genetic dead ends and bodily mutilation. And so I think some people look at the trans issue, as they should, as insane. But I'm like, there's other phenomena that are not as crazy as that, but they're in operation all the time.
Yeah, one way of seeing it, maybe a bit cynical, is that if this goes on, the very naive, gullible people, they're gonna get themselves out of the gene pool, right? And the very disagreeable people who don't trust authority are, gonna do fine. I'm doing fine. I hope you too. And then I know a lot of very high IQ people are doing fine, but if you're the kind of high IQ person who does trust the government for whatever reason, then you're probably not doing too well.
Yeah, there's that book we covered on the show a while ago that I'm sure you're familiar with called Exit Voice and Loyalty. And it was using the example of firms and corporations, but it was describing the phenomenon that typically the most high IQ people are the least likely to voice their concerns. And I think that's kind of what you're describing is like if they are high IQ, they have a longer time horizon, they see where things are going, they tend to just leave a situation because they have the ability to marshal their resources and strategize. And so
Right,
you see this even in schools, like when a school district is going wrong. The kids with the smartest parents will just leave instead of fighting for the school. And that's how the school ends up just full of dumb, lazy parents, essentially. Um, and you had raised a good point on your blog, and I'm going to quote this again here too because I really like it. Actually, this might have been from your Twitter, but you said, oh no, this is in your email, I think, but I liked it. It said, I don't want to fix the normies or grab power to influence them anymore. We have a hardware problem. The recent advances in genomics are the only thing that give me hope for the future. And I really like that line that we actually have a hardware problem. And that's something that I think a lot of the people on the right just kind of ignore, the bigger tectonic shift there. But we had talked briefly at the start about genetic engineering and whatnot. I was wondering, what about the technological solution makes you a bit more optimistic for the future?
right. So I've always been kind of pessimistic in general, but COVID really made it much worse for me. I remember going home in Europe in 2020 and seeing people masked in the streets. I know, and going to big cities, to small cities, then to the countryside. And you saw some variety of people, and I was really interested in seeing who refused to be masked, right? And I expected that in the countryside I would see very based salt of the earth types, right? That refused to follow the narrative. But no, I went to the countryside in Europe in a very small fishing town of like 5,000 people, and everybody was masked. It was like 98% compliance. And then it struck me, we really have a hardware problem. People are eating up all this bullshit. We don't need just better IQ, which we do. But there are plenty of high IQ, doctor types who are really, really evil during these years. So we have, I don't want to save these people anymore. We need, yeah, we just need smarter and less gullible, less collectivistic people at the hardware level.
And I see that on the right as well. I think COVID was a huge fracture point for the right. And I still don't think people have really resolved it. That there's some people on the dissident right, which is a pretty broad term, obviously, but people who to this day still don't think COVID was a big deal and have made enemies of those who, in their minds, overreacted to COVID. And I think it comes down to the IQ thing, like you had just said, that more than I've ever seen before, I'm seeing people in our scene start to decouple from the mass. Like there's no unity anymore because they're saying, I I need to become adjacent to power. I can't be held down by these crazy low IQ schizo people anymore. And
Yeah.
that's the grand fracturing I'm seeing. And I wonder, like I'm trying to map out like where the high performing high IQ people on the right are going to go, because it seems to model itself after what we do in society. Like the high IQ people sort of stratify and become their own entity. And I'm just trying to figure out, if is there a future where high IQ people just leave low IQ people behind and don't even try, and because traditionally the high IQ people would try and engineer and gerrymander and control the low IQ people, but you in your mind that era might even be over. Like there's no point with these two groups even participating with each other.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was bad in many ways, and but if say you're an American Trump supporter, right? And then Trump didn't do too well, and now, but Trump still has a lot of support, especially in the grassroots. And now you see Trump selling NFTs on the internet,
Yeah.
and you see the base of the Republican Party is still for him. And what do you do with that information, right? How can you put your time and energy and scarce resources into rallying these people up? Are these your people? How can you feel any kinship towards people who are buying Trump NFTs? I,
Yeah.
I, I don't think I don't think a lot of people. I mean, some people will, but you know, it's really hard to keep the sense of nation and of common destiny after all what's happening, after the demographic replacement, after COVID, after the griftification of the right. So I
Yeah.
see a lot of people just giving up.
I think people are giving up even though they were once idealistic, because once we run up against the wall of just this is something that even Dunn talks about, that we don't have the same evolutionary pressures. We have people surviving and thriving now who should never have survived and thrived in the past, and they're bringing all their junk DNA and genetics with them. And then if you are on the right and you are some kind of collectivist, some kind of populist, maybe even a fascist, maybe even like Christians are big on this too. Like, I don't judge, the lower classes, but even those people, I think, are pulling their hair out. Like, I don't know what to do with these fucking retarded freaks, And I'm
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of getting to that point too. I'm like, for some of these people, I'm like, especially if you a lot of the people on the right don't actually work, so they don't interface with the
yeah.
public a lot. But once you do, you see some people, like, you'll walk through a Walmart and go, god damn it. Like, I'm like, I guess white people have to die now. Like, you can walk through the lower classes. Sometimes you're like, I don't know a way out of someone wearing like a SpongeBob SquarePants thong to the store.
Yeah, I mean, being white is just not enough. That's for sure. But yeah, I mean, the locus of loyalty is, I'm pretty sure it's going to change. It made some sense to be a fascist 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. But after all that's happened and seeing the trend lines, it's just not going to work.
I was going to say, for in the near future, over the next 50 years, I know you're pretty cynical. I'm cynical as well, frankly. I take more of a Nick Landian approach on things, where I see the horizon of where technology is leading us, and it's just we need to adapt because it's not going to stop. But I was wondering, do you have any? Maybe it's the genetic engineering thing, but do you have any predictions for the next 10 to 50 years about how bad things could get?
Right. So again, the right is demoralized and just not doing well. The left is batshit insane and it's getting worse. But yeah, we have AI now, which is pretty neat. So if you're a smart guy with some computer knowledge, you'll be able to probably make good money if you have a good idea now. Right? You don't need to hire 100 people from India or anything to make some cool application. And at the more general level, yeah, I mean, we are getting to the place where embryo selection is already available, even though it's kind of gray zone. So you can have kids and ensure that they're healthy and as smart as you are, at least. And in short notice, we'll be able to just outright change genes in your offspring. So no. And once that cat's out of the bag, once you can make sure that all your children have a 150 IQ and they're 6 foot tall, well, who's not going to do that, right? Because you may have some religious scribbles about it, but you never will not. And eventually, one household will do it, then two, then three. Next thing you know, everybody's doing it.
That's a good point. And I know you probably have to get going soon, but I just have, if you have time, I just have one last question that I was kind of tickling the back of my mind. One thing you had said on your blog was that we discussed this at the beginning, how liberal leadership has traditionally been bad at coordinating itself, which kind of leaves it open for corruption. And speaking of COVID, a lot of people talk about, Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and the Davos Summit and everything. And a lot of people in our scene dismiss that and they say it's not important and who gives a shit. I don't believe that, obviously. But when I look at that, when I look at the things they're talking about, I wonder if that is just a new way for this sort of elite to coordinate itself on a global scale, because this is sort of new territory for them, and to do it out in the open. And for dissidents and people on the right, kind of the people we've been talking about, the people on the right who maybe have a higher IQ or could actually see what's going on, do you think there's any realistic way for the dissidents or people like ourselves to coordinate together in the same way that the liberals and leftists seem to be coordinating on a global stage right now with Davos and stuff like that? Does that seem like something we can even try to accomplish?
No, the bad guys really want us to try, so they can arrest us all. I just had a friend tell me that he's got in legal trouble. He's getting getting charged for hate crimes in the UK, and they can destroy your life on a whim. Look at Andrew Tate, and again, not particularly a fan of the guy, but he's in prison now, and apparently not charged, but they can hold him in prison for 6 months. So and they took all his assets, and pretty sure they're gonna fuck him up.
Do you recommend people do what you did, which is move to a geographic area where you perhaps get a bit more freedom? Because I heard you speak on a podcast recently. I think it was um, it's called like Med Hours or something like that. But you were saying that, where you live right now, I'm not going to dox you or anything, but where you live right now, you feel that you can live more comfortably and freely as a white man, a European man. Is that something you would recommend to others?
I did move to so I moved to Japan age 18 and have stayed. Then I moved to China. Then I've been around the area since then. So all my adult life, I do like it because I'm good at languages, and then I adapt pretty easily. I'm not a man of habits, so I don't mind moving at all. But I do know some people do, right? I know plenty of people who've been 20 years in, say, China, and they still don't speak Chinese. If you're that kind of guy, I would not recommend you to move here. Foreigners are weird, and you might not be okay with that. But if you're, high openness, like they say, then yeah, East Asia is a cool place. I know people very happy in South America, and I do recommend people to try. Travel the world, see what you like.
In geopolitical terms, do you see, for example, the West or America specifically on a downward trajectory, and perhaps the areas that you're living in or you recommend people live in, they're on the upswing? Is that a reality people need to live in, do you think?
I don't think so. In economic terms, I don't think. I mean, of course, the West in the global economy is going to help. Besides, I mean, if AI might change things, but in general terms, public finances in all civilized countries have really bad demographics, right? The pension systems just don't work, so we're all gonna get poor in many ways, even if not nominally in real terms. East Asia is not any better. I mean, Japan is effectively bankrupt in many ways. Uh, China is doing well-ish, but again, the demographic stuff is bad, and they're gonna start spending more money in their old people, and there's just too many of them. I don't think there's any real emerging country. Maybe Vietnam, which is, still has some potential. I am not bullish on India for many reasons.
Me neither.
So I don't think there's really any emerging power that's gonna take over and should just move there and take over. China will do okay. We'll grow some more, but then we'll just stabilize in more or less the same lifestyle we have.
You know, one way to look at the IQ shredding phenomenon is a genocide of the troublemakers. And one thing we discussed this on the last episode, we read this book called "Seeing Like a State," and it was over the course of centuries and centuries, various projects that states and various countries had done to try and simplify processes and help the people. And usually it all ends in tears. But one of the central stories of the book across different cultures was that usually centralized power finds communities and folkways very frustrating and useless and tries to almost strip them away. And you had a comment in your blog that essentially was saying that white men are troublemakers. White men are always the ones who reject things, they question things, they cause problems for the centralized power. And I think you saw the exact same thing with COVID. With it was most like the trucker protests is one example, but all throughout the world, it only seemed that the ones really raising a stink about it until recently with China, but we're mostly like white guys, and we're willing to go to the mat for it. And I see the same thing happening with AI. That I honestly think it's only really white guys and white guys of a certain IQ that are ringing the bells about the fears of IQ. I mean IQ, but AI. And I think that once you get those people to either shut up or die or be quiet, whatever the plans are with AI to roll it out to, like, once the high IQ people are gone, the low IQ people will love AI because AI will be the only intelligent entity on the planet. Does that sound like a realistic outcome?
No, I wouldn't put it that way. No, I know that black pill. I don't. I mean, high IQ people are not going anywhere. The high does want the middle to go away because the threatens. So a societal structure where you have a very thin top and a very very wide low with no middle is ideal for the ruling class, right? Because they have less of a danger of being replaced. But we'll still have smart people around.
That's an interesting model. I don't think a lot of people talk about that. Maybe the dissolution, because the middle class as a phenomena seems to be within a very short window of time, especially in the West. So there's not really this thing called the middle class throughout time. So maybe once the middle class is finally dissolved, and you only have what are the self-elected aristocrats and then the serfs of various ethnicities, maybe that is just the natural state of things. And in that case, the people who listen to podcasts will obviously be at the top.
I mean, look at history. The Middle Ages. Look at South America today. You have that, right? It just happens that the racial divide between the top and the low is very obvious, but it didn't have to be.
I honestly think that once the boomers are just pass away, that we will see the social strata resort to that in a faster way. Like this thing called the middle class may finally die out with boomers, and maybe it'll hang on for a bit longer. But it's you already have generations here that are feeling like the middle class is dissolving, and that it's a phenomena that they don't get to enjoy, and then it'll just go away and things will get back to normal. And then I guess we'll have to rely on technology for all the smart people to rise to the top. But let me ask you this before we go: high IQ people that we're talking about, the ones who that will likely survive, do you think they will retain? Like, will they be more interested in genetics? And like, so for like Europeans, let's say, would they become more, let's say, racist, or would they, do you think the high IQ whites will still be trying to keep like making white babies and genetically perfect babies, or do you think that's only going to be the interest of the global south?
Culturally, I mean, is it a racial thing, right? So when an Indian woman buys a skin whitening cream, she doesn't want to be Swedish. She doesn't want to be white. She just wants to have light skin because she finds it beautiful, right? And the same with the South American peasant, right? When Hugo Chavez married a white woman after getting power, he didn't do so because of his deep appreciation of the Indo-European Aryan steppe people. No, he just wanted a hot wife. So, to what extent rich Europeans with access to gene catalogs for their babies are going to choose whiter skin? Probably not, right? Because white people are actually more into variety, and you might see rich Europeans choosing black babies just for the kick of it. But again, once you have genes, you can choose individual genes, and this makes your eyes blue, and this makes your skin that color, and this makes you freckles, and that race stops mattering. It's not a matter of race anymore. It's just like making your own player in a video game.
Yeah, it introduces an interesting problem, especially for those, not just white people, but even black people as well, who are very race conscious, very ethnicity conscious. That, is the ethnicity surviving, and those is the folk surviving if they are just made in a lab? So, for example, would a white nationalist in America accept the future that white people are thriving, but only in Mexican families? Like, they're being born and they're blonde hair, they're blue eyed, and maybe genetically they're as close to being a pure Germanic people as they can, but because they're being essentially lab grown, does that make them happy, or do they still see something wrong with that? And that's a question that I don't think anyone expected to have to answer. You know what I mean?
I mean, ideally, I do think that the whole concept of race and ethnicity is going to matter much less once genetic engineering is a thing, and hopefully the left sees it the same way, right? And that makes them not ban the whole thing because they do say they want, they want a post-racial world, right? Not that they actually want it, but
That is interesting. That this will be another one of those leftist wins, won't it? That they're going to be the ones that really champion this through, and it will be the right and the conservatives who fight it every step of the way and probably lose. Um, anyway, so I know you're short on time and you have to go. We're at an hour, and I think this has been a fantastic interview. Was there anything else that had really burning a hole in your mind that you wanted to discuss today as well?
no, 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 really. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. And just to let people know, once again, check out spandrell.com, Spandrell.com. You'll have all of his writings. Check out on the right hand side of the page. He's got his essays on Bioleninism, IQ shredders, and all kinds of other great things. And check him out on Twitter at Spandrell3. He's on there very, very often. And get into Urbit when you can. And so, Mr. Spandrell, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a fantastic interview.
Thanks. You're good.
Thank you. Bye.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.